Good evening and welcome to another live broadcast Blether Wi Heather. This is an occasional series of Scots language conversations coming to you for Hands Up for Trad. Over the last few weeks, we've been getting excellent blethers in we are like, say, sangster Iona Fife and Fermer Alan Innes, while they're telling us about their lives in Scots. Next week, we have Erin Farley. She is a librarian, researcher and storyteller who abides in Dundee, and she's going to be telling us all about the Scots language in Dundee and her adventures collecting folk tales of Angus for a new publication. That's all building up to the Giza Scots Phrase Day on the 4th of June. Giza Scots Phrase Day is essentially a chance for Abdi out there across Scotland and around the world to record themselves saying their favourite Scots phrase. So that's things you've maybe picked up for your granny, for your mammy, for whatever, around about you if you've just flitted over to Scotland. Things like dinna cast a clute afore may be out. All that kind of good stuff. You need a lang spoon to sup wi' a fifer. So, the Giza Scots Phrase Day on the 4th of June. Please do join in. And I'll be asking this evening's guest, after we've got a blether about other things, what his favourite Scots phrase is too. You can join in at home by firing into the comments below the video on YouTube, on Twitter, on Facebook, and we'll see them. Why don't you tell us what your favourite Scots phrase is? Without further ado, I'd like to introduce this evening's guest. He's in the most ken speckle Scots sangsters out there. It's Arbroath's finest, Steve Byrne.
All right, Ali, how's it going, man?
Hi, no bad, no bad. How are you getting on yourself?
Oh, fine, Canada, as we say in my perps.
Good stuff, good stuff. So we have hunters to get through. You're a guy busy man considering the fact we're in still some sort of lockdown. Tell us, first of all your interesting projects, this in particularly is close to your heart. You've stumbled across a particularly important bouzouki.
Aye, folk that kens me from Malinky will ken that I play this big kind of mandolin-style instrument called the bouzouki. The history of the bouzouki in Scottish and Irish music goes back to about the 50s or 60s. And when I was about 12 or 13, the late Roy Williamson, the Corries, passed away. And there was a video came out in tribute to him, and he was playing the first ever performance of Floor of Scotland. And it was back in, I think, early 1968 in Ruthven Barracks, and he was sitting there playing this kind of lute-like instrument with Ronnie Brown on the baran. And that was the first public performance on the telly of Floor of Scotland before it kind of took off as a song and became what we can know as a kind of sporting national anthem. And so I was aware that after Roy died, there had been an auction of his effects and his instruments and all that kind of thing. And my father at the time was travelling around with his business and so forth, but couldn't actually get up to the auction in order to get me on a thing. But this bouzouki was part of the auction, and I got wind a couple of years saying that there was a couple that were actually looking to maybe move the bouzouki on. They had bought it at the auction, and they were, again, they're knowing that the spring chickens new, and they were looking to do something with the bouzouki and make sure it was kept in fine fettle for future generations. So back in about 2019, I managed to do a bit of internet sleuthing, using a bit of Facebook, and managed to get in touch with them and get to see them after we were up at a sang festival up in Aberdeenshire in the summer of 2019. And it has stayed with me since then in my house in East Lothian. And as you can, last year we were hoping together, Ali, to do that concert in Arbroath for the 700th anniversary of the Declaration. We were hoping I was going to play the bouzouki on stage, but that didn't come to pass with the pandemic. So in the end, last summer it was the 30th anniversary of Roy Williamson's passing in 2020. So I did a crowdfunder to get the money basically to buy the bouzouki and to donate it to any of the museums.
Lovely, lovely. Now, before we go any further, let's have a look at that bouzouki in action a while back in the 60s.
O flower of Scotland, will we see your likes again? That fought and died for your it hill and glen and stood against him. Proud Edward's army and sent him homeward. They think again.
Amazing, amazing, amazing. A sensational piece of music there. It isn't a version of Flower of Scotland I ken that well. It certainly isn't even that I sing at the football or the rugby. Steve, can you tell us, what was the cultural context of Flower of Scotland when it was first released back into late 60s Scotland?
Steve he's disappeared momentarily.
Nightmare. Nae bother. So I think what we'll hate today is talk a wee bit more about this bouzouki until Steve comes back. So I was getting a blether with Steve ahead this evening's interview, and he was telling us all about the importance of this bouzouki in terms of the folk culture and I suppose the kind of emergent folk scene in Scotland for the 60s onwards. We hear a couple of photos of Steve with the bouzouki and the bouzouki itself. So there he is, as prude as if he's got a wooden bairn on his knee there. The bouzouki itself, if we've got a closer up image of it, is a very bonny thing in and of itself. But of course, it was the instrument on which Flower of Scotland was written. There was a lot of debates around the independence referendum about whether Flower of Scotland would continue to be our anthem after independence, or if we needed something a bit more modern, a bit more up to date, a bit more reflective of where we are today. And if Steve was here, I'd be asking him incisive questions about the cultural context of Flower of Scotland. And I'm sure he'll be giving us fascinating answers. Alas, we have lost Steve for the moment, I think. The next thing we were going to be hearing about Face Steve was a recent project that's going on up and down the East Coast, where a series of new songs are being commissioned by the kind of traditional arts bodies. Aberdeenshire Council, for example, are putting a bit of money into commissioning new songs commemorating and celebrating the coasts and waters of Angus, the Mearns, Aberdeenshire. Steve has just been recording a new song for a collection that'll be out soon, and this is just a sample for it.
But the sons o' St. Cyrus are crying hame to me. I'd like to take the old North Road, feel the cold North Sea, with Murphy kicking out us, far we I wander free. I'll meet ye up by Brackenrigg, St. Cyrus sons to see.
Steve, a lovely wee extract for your new tune about St. Cyrus there. Tell us first about the project, and we'll chat a wee bit more about the Mearns after.
That's fine. Sorry, I got cut off there. It's a project today with Stonehaven Folk Club that has put together an album of songs today with coastal communities, and they got funding for Aberdeenshire Council to basically put together this project to employ songwriters to come up with songs today with the area around Steenhive, as we would ken it. And St. Cyrus is an area that I ken a wee bit of. My ancestors was born up around Benholm and came down to Montrose. So it was a pretty obvious fit for myself. So I was delighted to be asked to write a song for that. And there was all sorts of themes to do with nature and the place names and everything to do with that. And Mike Vass from Malinky has been is the producer of that. And he's putting it all together. And there's a wheen of folk for arts and perts in the Mearns, local singers that maybe under that we'll kent, but getting to some of the folk clubs and some professional singers as well, like myself, and I think Jenny Sturgeon's involved and a few other folk. So, aye.
Here, that sounds dead, Bonnie. I'm passionate about the region myself because I spent lockdown 1 in Fordon. And so I came the 6 miles around about Fordon off a wheel from it, endless wandering. And my family, myself, from Rimmen, just out the back of Montrose. So it is kind of, for them that didn't ken the area so well, tell us about how the folk scene is and how the traditions are getting on in that kind of Angus, Mearns, South Aberdeenshire kind of region.
Sure. I mean, the main qua that I would ken about that area, well, maybe 3 places, I suppose, would be Kerry and Kerrymuir, and then up to Montrose, where the folk club is going strong, and then up to Steenhive and the Folk Club. They would be the main places that I would have kent as a bairn where there was folk music and traditional music going on. And they're still going strong, as I say, in Kerry, and Montrose Folk Club would be probably the place that I think we've maybe played the most as a band, and myself visited as a loon, and Steenhive, we were at the festival there a couple of years time as well. So it's a thriving scene.
Lovely, lovely. You can't beat Steenhive Folk Festival. It's absolutely sensational as a weekend. It takes about 4 years off your life if you do the whole night there, but it's wonderful. So tell us, St. Cyrus, all the Airts and Perts, the East Coast there that you could have commemorated and give a sang to. How come you willed St. Cyrus?
It was one of the places that it just kind of lent itself well in terms of these kind of things. I tend, even with community projects, I tend to get the map out and here look at Alder maps, which you can do on the National Library of Scotland website. You can get on there and look at maps side by side, the modern map alongside the Aldines, and you just get a feel for the poetry and the places. And kind of looking along the sort of North Esk and looking the river for Ingles, Maddie, all the way out towards Montrose and St. Cyrus. There was just that many places around St. Cyrus and further up that folk will hear in the song. That was just a wee snippet there, but they're woven through the rest of the song about the places that are further up the coast and in the back. Brackenrig, for example, is the ferrums that's mentioned in the song. It sings well. That's often what I look for is places that are poetic, and it's following in the traditions, I suppose, of the Angus poets like Violet Jacob, Helen Cruikshank, folk like that.
Lovely, lovely. So when can folk get their hands on this new record? And how can they get it?
I'm no hour sure of the exact release date. It's just been recorded the new in Glasgow and partly in Aberdeenshire and that. But I'd imagine it would later into the summer. I'm not sure if it'll be ready for the Stonehaven Folk Festival time, but it will certainly be ready in the next few months, I'd imagine.
Lovely, lovely. No doubt you'll get plenty of updates through the Hands Up for Trad, Facebook and Twitter when that's all coming out. Now, as you said yourself, we were meant to be doing a concert for the 700th year of the Declaration of Arbroath back in April 2020. That was one of the first things to get cancelled with the COVID. And we've been a long time away from live gigs, a long time away from crowds and buildings and that kind of good stuff. You've been... obviously, you've a bairn yourself. You've been homeschooling. I've been dead interested in, first of all, what does a Steve Byrne curriculum look like? What happens when a folk is put in charge of the curriculum?
Well, the thing is that the folk is not really in charge of the curriculum. You get sent along late of things for the skill to get through, and I think the parents were more knackered than the bairns at the end of it. But I think what we tried today, and it's something that I mind really for growing up with my grandparents and my mother and my auntie really, for we would spend a lot of time out in nature, out the nature trails at the cliffs at Arbroath or along St. Vigins. And really we try to use some of that with a bit of garden space here and getting busy with a lot of folk got busy in their gardens or got growing fruit and veg and that whole kind of thing. So natural environment was something that we were keen to make sure that we got away from the computer screen, because there was a lot of time in the Google Meets and the other things were online, really, a lot of the activities. So outdoors and trying to get into nature.
Lovely, lovely. So most of your life, though, you've spent on stage or in a club with other folkies, playing gigs, writing new songs, kenning that be an audience nae far away to be listening to it. How has it felt to yourself over the last 16 months now to know hey that audience on the horizon, to know be eye on that treadmill producing new work for an audience?
It's interesting. The treadmill's an interesting name because it is something that you get into and you take a decision to do that as a career, and you end up having to be kind of active all the time and planning ahead. You can 18 months, 12 years ahead, and you hate to just. I always hear the diary open, whereas this time you've been able to just take a bit of space and gather your thoughts and no hate to, I suppose, stress or worry however much about things that is coming up. And I'll be perfectly honest, for all the downsides there is and the sadness of not being able to play with folk, there's been a kind of regrouping or skill or kind of energies and whatnot, and life priorities, I suppose, in terms of seeing just how much we were doing on the road. And again, there's been a fair few blogs that some musicians have written about their experiences in lockdown. And I think if I was asked to do a similar thing, I would probably go along the lines of examining just how worthwhile it is doing what we're doing in terms of the sacrifices that we are make, especially those of us that are maybe getting that wee bit older and settling down and having bairns and family and sick like, where your commitments are a bit different. And there's loads of musicians, my generation, a bit older, that will identify with this. But I think the pandemic has brought it into sharper relief, especially in terms of the economy of gigging generally, but for folk music especially. And the double whammy of gigging being off with the pandemic, but also thinking about what's happening with Brexit. With Malinky, we spent a load of time in Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark. They'd be three places that we spent most of our touring life over the years, and we just didn't ken what's the heat is for them. So never mind getting back on the stage after the pandemic. It's just a case of finding out what's really worth doing alongside the trackle of having to do the paperwork and the additional costs. Because we've done tours in America, and we ken what the trackle is to get sorted to getting over there, and you're a good few £1,000 before you even leave your house. So if it ends up being the same, and not to end up on a depressing note, but I think we're going to look at other models of how we get our music out there and ways that we engage with folk, and maybe looking at ways of being a bit more local about what we do, and realising that being away on the road all the time doesn't make sense financially, doesn't necessarily make sense for your family, doesn't even make sense in terms of the environment. So it's given a lot of us a wee additional shove to think about are they different kinds of pressures.
That is dead interesting. Aye, when you put it like that, there probably is quite a good amount to chew over in terms of what sort of cultural scene we want to see come back for musicians. Because I can for myself, I can't wait to get back to gigs. I'm hoping to see plenty more gigging musicians around about, but I didn't want to see them out of pocket and out of their minds, just trying to bring me a wee bit of entertainment.
Indeed. And that's the trouble, trying to work out again what's going to be financially viable in the short term with reduced audiences and all that sort of thing against the public health. So just no share, but we'll hear a bit more time to think about it, because our Fiona will be here in a Byrne in August, so we'll hear a wee while yet to gather our thoughts.
Lovely. Now, the final thing we're going to touch on before you're going to give us a Scots Phrase of your own is this fascinating project you've been working on around intangible cultural heritage. Now, I had Steve explain this to me offline before we got started. I understood about 60% of it. So I'm going to get Steve to really crack it down. First of all, what is intangible cultural heritage, and what's going on in Scotland around about it?
Sure. It's a term that folk maybe didn't recognise. It doesn't trip off the tongue all that easy. Put most simply, it's kind of folklore and folk life, folks' ways of doing. It's our oral traditions, our performing arts like traditional song, music and dance. It's festivals and rituals like the Steenhive fireballs at New Year, or piping in the haggis. Are they kind of traditional things that we do?
We've got the Bury Man as an example.
Bury Man, exactly. And
there he is there. So just while he's up on the screen, tell us what this is.
So this is the Bury Man, which is a character in South Queensferry that gangs out ilka summer, and he is covered literally in burrs and gangs round the town in a kind of procession, and has a wee slip for a wee dram, and you can just about make out that you can see his een in his mouth, and gangs round the town in this annual traditional calendar custom. And there's a whole queen of these things over the world, of course, and we've our own bunch of them in Scotland. So it's they kind of calendar customs, but as well as I'm saying other things to do with oral traditions and folklore, ways about how we understand nature and the universe. So maybe traditional ways of growing, say, fruit in the Carsa Gowrie, as well as traditional craftsmanship. So that would be along the lines of your basket weavers, you can folk that are doing hand kilt making, that sort of thing. So are these kind of traditional ways of doing that are, I suppose, for want of a better term, are probably at risk, many of them, because we're in the globalised world. We're not necessarily thinking about these old traditional ways of doing. And so intangible cultural heritage is about protecting it. And the name came about through a UNESCO convention. UNESCO has loads of conventions for all kinds of cultural kind of goings on, and it has this particular convention to protect these sort of traditions in societies and communities around the world. And 100 and odd countries have signed up to it, but most of the Anglophone countries hasn't signed up to it. And it came into force in, it's the convention of 2003, and it came in 2006 is when it came into force. So you can look at countries that have done all sorts of things, like Ireland, just over the water. The main thing you're meant to do is make a list, what they cry a national inventory, or the kinds of things that you think are representative of the folk that bides where you are. And for some countries, that can be folk that have come from other places in the world and made their home there as well. So it's not just our indigenous traditions. And so for Ireland, it's things like hurling, and it's things like uilleann piping, the Irish piping, or the Irish harping. They've put things like that onto their list. So in the Scottish context, the Scottish government had looked to kind of do that, but because it's an international treaty, they kind of sign up themselves because it's reserved to the UK government. But as part of the
if I can just ask, in terms of Ireland signed up to this, they've put this leak together, what makes up their intangible cultural heritage. You've given us an idea of what Scotland's intangible cultural heritage might be. If we get independent and we are able to sign up to the treaty, what does it actually change? What does the treaty achieve?
Well, it's an interesting thing. I mean, there's loads of debate about it, and there's screeds and screeds that I've read over the past year with this report that I've been writing on ICH in Scotland. ICH is the kind of shorthand for it. Essentially what it does, it's the state undertakes to protect these things that you identify. And the important thing is it's communities themselves hate to identify the traditions and the practices that they think they would like to have looked after. And so it's a commitment to the state to say, Richto, in the case of Ireland, we think and we value uilleann piping, Irish piping, so the state has undertaken to protect that. And that's through basically putting it onto the national list. And then every so often they have to give an update to UNESCO and say, is the tradition of Irish piping still thriving? Or is it under threat? Do you hate to do anything to help safeguard it? So it's a pretty,
Good stuff.
It's a pretty important thing in terms of the way that folk culture has traditionally not been the domain of officialdom and of governments, really. Certainly no in the sort of Western European context. So it's an interesting process, and it'd be great, I think, if Scotland gets signed up.
Aye, smashing. Well, that's the things that will maybe emerge if we have this other independence referendum and all that kind of good stuff. But certainly I could see the advantage of that, because Scots language is already registered as part of the endangered languages with UNESCO, and they hate to put in a report, and they're compelled to action at the UK level to actually do something for Scots. We can debate around the houses about if they're doing enough, and if what they're doing is effective or no, but they hate to be accountable to somebody for their actions around Scots and Welsh and Irish and all that kind of good stuff. So I can see the relevance and the importance of it. It sounds awfully interesting. Now, another part of our intangible cultural heritage is, of course, Scots, and part of that is Scots phrases. We get our guests on Blether Wi Heather to give us a Scots phrase. Steve, what do you have for us?
Well, it's probably a Ken Speckle, Wheel Kenting, but my granny would I say, what's for you, no ging by you.
What's for you, I'll no ging by you. That's a belter. That's one of the ones that changes a wee bit as a ging around Scotland, eh?
I think so.
But tell us, in what context, can you mind your granny saying it in a specific context? When you come home scunnered that you didn't win a race, or you didn't get the ducks or whatever?
I can't mind now that you put me on the spot, of course. I'm not ever sure, but probably in the context my first proper guitar that I ever got when I was 16, my granny and granda had saved up through these kind of weekly clubs for they'd put money away for their grandbairns, and so it was probably in the context of that, in terms of me, getting a bit scunnered with no having a good guitar, and that's what they came up with. So the age of 16 set me on the path.
Oh, she's right enough then. You've certainly got enough guitars to keep yourself in a tune for a while yet.
Right.
Steve, I'm going to thank you very much for your smashing company. and I'm going to wish you well in your future endeavours. With that project, we obviously your bouzouki, that's going to be fascinating, and of course the new sang that when it's out and about, folk can hear about it through Hands Up for Trad, and of course by following yourself, Byrne Sang or Byrne Song on Twitter. Steve, a very good evening to you.
All the best, man. Cheers.
Cheers. And for you at home, you can join us again next week when we'll hear Erin Farley, Dundonian librarian, storyteller, and local historian. What's going to be us all sorts of interesting chat about the folklore of Angus and the Scots language in Dundee. And of course, didn't forget, Giza Scots Phrase Day on the 4th of June. Cheers and see you next week.